I've spoken to many Ukrainians, and there was an attempted assassination of him back, I think it was May 7th, and he replaced his bodyguard, and he no longer trusts Ukrainians. I mean, what I've heard from many of them is that if he was on fire, they wouldn't urinate on him until he was dead. Their push to this digital currency is part of the capital control. So I strongly advise watch that. If you want to get money out, you better do it beforehand.
Hello and welcome to Soar Financially, a channel where we discuss the macro to understand the micro. My name is Kai Hoffman. I'm the JR mining guy over on X, and of course, your host of this channel. And you might have noticed I'm not in my usual studio. I'm traveling. I'm on the road this week. I'm in Zurich. I'm attending the European Gold Forum, and I brought my travel setup. I'm doing this mobile. I don't mind doing it. I love doing interviews on the road. So if there are any issues, please let us know in the comments. But I've brought my microphone and everything, so it should be all right. Really looking forward to hosting Martin Armstrong today. He's a first-time guest on the channel, and of course, he's the founder of Armstrong Economics. Really excited to have him on because he can really combine the geopolitical with the economy, the markets for us. And lots to discuss, of course, lots going on. Just this morning, again, sable rattling in Iran, almost like a missile crisis happening there yet again. So we'll have to see how this all plays out and how that figures into the markets. And of course, Wednesday's Liberation Day, big tariff announcements. How do they impact everything on a global basis as well? Markets are a bit jittery. Japan was down 3.5% as we record this today on Monday, the 31st of March. We'll get into all this and the specifics with Martin here in a few short seconds. Hit that like and subscribe button. It helps us out tremendously, and we appreciate it. It doesn't cost you a thing, by the way. So thanks so much for doing that. Now, let me bring Martin on the screen. Martin, it's great to have you on the program. Thank you so much for joining us on Soar Financially.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, really looking forward to this. And this is usually as educational for me as for our audience. So I really enjoy these conversations, Martin. But let's dive right in. We have lots to discuss, of course. But let's start with a very holistic question that I usually ask my guests for the first time here. Is what's your current assessment of the economy and the financial markets with all that's going on?
Well, globally, we are heading into a recession, which won't bottom until about 2028. And most of this is basically created by decline in economic growth, etc. My concern would be that the Democrats in general will probably try to blame tariffs on Trump causing it, etc. But this is really a problem that is global in nature. You have, serious debt problems in Japan, but in Europe, a lot of people don't quite understand the whole euro versus dollar thing. When they were creating the euro, they actually came to me. I sat down with them, said, this is how we create a currency, etc. And at the time, Helmut Kohl was Chancellor of Germany. And he even admitted before he died that if he did not allow the German people to vote, because he said he would have lost 7-3. So he took Germany into the euro basically on an executive order. What he realized that the German people would object about would be the debts. So he insisted Germany will join the euro, but there could not be any consolidation of debt. Now, this is what I warned them back then, that, this is going to tear the euro apart. And I was told back in 1998, we understand, we just have to get the euro in, and then we'll worry about the debts later. And here we are, 25, still nothing, all right, on the debt side. Now, for those that are traders would understand this. I mean, before, if you were bullish Germany and bearish Italy or whatever, you'd buy the currency of Germany and short the lira. All the euro did was it transferred that volatility from currencies to the bond markets. So since the debt was not consolidated, you now have people just trading the spreads, the bonds versus Italy or France or whatever. And so you really didn't accomplish anything. And as a major fund manager, I could pick up the phone and say, buy me $10 billion worth of treasuries. When it comes to Europe, I still have to make the same decisions I would make before the euro. Oh, let me see. Who do I want? Germany? Do I want Italy? Do I want France? You still got to make the same decisions. And this is what's tearing the euro apart. All right. It's and we saw the first real risk back in 2010 when Greece got into trouble. What happened? The traders immediately, everybody made a lot of money, shorting Greece. And then it's like, okay, who's next? Oh, Spain, Portugal, Italy, this is the way capital moves. And I would suggest, reading Herbert Hoover's memoirs. They're free. It's online. To read the chapter from 1931. What caused the Great Depression was a debt crisis. All of Europe basically defaulted. Even Canada defaulted. And what creates a depression is a debt crisis, not stock market crash. Stock market, you can take it down, 70%. Not everybody's involved in that. When you're talking about debt is about 10 times that of equity. That's what made 07 to 09 really what they call the Great Recession. Why? Because that involved real estate. All right, real estate to the average person is like their savings account. Everything shows that as long as real estate's going up, people will spend more freely. They feel that they made money on their house or whatever. If the real estate goes down, all right, even if they're still earning the same amount of money, they spend less. All right, they feel that they've lost money. It's kind of viewed as their savings account. So when the banks created these mortgage-backed securities, they were really, playing around with fire. And that's what made the 07, to 09 crisis the worst. All right, because you undermined the debt market and real estate went with it. So a stock market crash going down 20%, 30%, 40%, that's doesn't take down the whole economy. It's you got to look at who was really at stake here. So if you look at the Great Depression, like I said, read 1931, 9,000 banks failed. Goldman Sachs was selling foreign bonds to mom and pops. All right. So they lost a ton of money. And so that's the real distinction here. And so when I say we're going into this recessionary period into 2028, what makes it more serious that I'm concerned about is that it's also involving sovereign debts. And, if General Motors goes bust, everything's sold off at auction, you get some of your money back. All right. When a government goes bust, you get nothing. It's unsecured debt. That's it. So, and the danger with them is always that there is no rule of law. Italy, when it got into trouble and you bought 30-day paper and they couldn't pay it, oh, okay, we're just converting that to 10 years. I didn't default, even during the Depression, the city of Detroit defaulted. But they say nobody ever defaulted. True, because they eventually paid it off with inflation, 1963. So if you were looking to get your money in 1937, I think you would have starved to death. All right. So, that's the big, I would say, distinction. When you're talking about a debt crisis versus a stock market crash, they're substantially different. And that's what I'm concerned about going into 2028. You see this in Europe, and look, you have people like Macron beating the war drums, talking about, there was Hermann Göring, the German field marshal, was put on trial at Nuremberg. And they asked him, how did you get all the German people to follow? He says, oh, that's easy. Just tell them they're going to be attacked, and pacifists are for the enemy, and nationalists. We have to defend our country. Macron's using that very same thing. Oh, he's handing out proposals how to survive an invasion from Russia. And you have the head of the EU out there basically saying if Ukraine falls, all of Europe falls. What are they doing? All right. It's the debt crisis. They know this is unsustainable. All right. And governments fail when you're in these Ponzi schemes, when you cannot sell the new debt to pay off the old. All right, that's when it all comes crashing down. That's where Europe's at. So they're beating the war drums, and there's always been this anti-Americanism in Europe anyhow. I had published a report. The CIA actually created the European Union. They funded it. The declassified documents are out. And from their perspective, they wanted Europe to be unified as a defense against communism. And de Gaulle basically had this complex, they call it a Napoleon complex, that since Napoleon lost, France has always wanted to be the leader of Europe. So the U.S. had to threaten de Gaulle. It was against joining Europe. He finally agreed. He had accepted Germany in, but not the British. This goes back to Waterloo, and Britain couldn't join the EU until de Gaulle died. I mean, that's how these petty things, go on for a long time. In 1966, he ordered all, I want all American troops out of France. And they questioned, well, does that include all the dead ones that are buried there, he ordered all NATO, no nuclear arms in France. France is now the third largest nuclear power, all on their own. You have Macron out there telling Germany, we don't need America. We'll extend our nuclear umbrella to protect Germany. So this is the same thing. It's just systemic. It's been going on for a very long time. And, when we were going to open our office in Geneva back in 1985, back then our reports would go out over telex, and it was $75 to receive just one, down like in the Middle East. So that's why we became like the biggest and institutional, because nobody else could afford it, really. So we were opening an office in Geneva in 1985 with the idea that we would send one set of reports there and then redistribute from there to bring the costs down. And one of our clients was one of the big banks there, and I went to lunch with him and I asked him, because I knew about this anti-Americanism there. So I asked, I said, I had a bunch of European names. I said, what do you think, which one we should use? And he said to me, he says, name one European analyst. And I was embarrassed because I couldn't at the time. And I said, I'm sure there are, I just don't know. And he laughed and he says, there are none. He says, you don't realize why everybody uses you. And I said, no. He says, because you don't care if the dollar is going up or down. I said, it's just a trade. All right. And then he explained to me that after World War II, the politicians used the currency to validify they did a good job. See, Deutschmark's up 20% against the dollar. That proves I did a good job. So consequently, no analyst at any institution could dare come out and say the Deutschmark would go down. It was a political statement. And you still see this in Europe. No major bank analyst is going to come out and say the euro is going to crash. ECB pick up the phone and say, fire the guy. Estonia threw an economist in prison for 6 months because he said there was going to be a recession after 2007. And you just had Vance over there at the Munich conference talking about this problem, free speech in Europe, and they shut everybody down. Look at what they've done politically in Romania to try and stop, any political challenge. We've just gotten that out of France with a court, trying to ban Le Pen for 5 years from running when she's the front runner for 27 already. It's the same thing that, the Democrats did against Trump. The left is generally just at a point of they're really desperate. And this is causing a real problem politically and undermining the confidence in government debt. That's the link between the two. And if you don't trust the politician, do you really want to buy their debt?
Tough sell.
Yeah, and plus you're now talking. You got Macron, saying we're going to be invaded by Russia. Etc. So the one thing you don't want to do is buy government debt during war. They default. All right, a new government comes afterwards, and guess what? They don't pay off. Even the U.S., the Constitution said that they would honor the debt of the Continental Congress. They never did. They defaulted on it. You can buy, colonial currency on eBay all the time. It's no big deal. So there is no real exception to that. So beating these war drums, that's how Europe is going to get out of the debt. And I can tell you that a delusional statement, I just couldn't even believe it, but they thought that that they have weakened Russia with Ukraine conventionally, and that they could invade and take Russia without a problem. You had or that neocon Kinzinger said we could take Russia in 3 days. So I guess 5 days for China, right? And you have NATO saying that, they can take down Russia without the United States. Why? Because Russia has $75 trillion in natural resource assets. And the craziest thing that I have heard, if they take a hold of Russia, then they will be worth twice the value of the U.S. national debt. U.S. will be subservient. And once again, Europe will rise like the Roman Empire to lead the world. It's...
that sounds a bit megalomaniac.
It is.
Megalomaniacal, right?
I don't, it's crazy. What I've heard is, Putin will never push the button because he knows it will blow back on him. I've heard every excuse under the book. It's like, because they're desperate, they know they're losing power. So they come up with these crazy ideas, I guess.
Martin, I have to follow up just on that point. Like you said, Europe is trying to get out of debt with, is it warmongering or actual war? That's the question.
It seems to be actual war. Yeah, look, I met with one of the governments there, and I said, look, let's be honest. Hitler was a historian buff. He didn't bomb any of the monuments, and he stole all the art. He maybe killed a bunch of people, but he seemed to like those aspects. I said he didn't bomb Paris because he said it was a pretty city. Okay. This time around, they lob one in here to get your ass, and everything's gone. You know, this is a different game.
Yeah, I have a question. Maybe like, are we already in the middle of a war? Because the question is like the distinction between sabotage and terrorism and war. Where do you draw the line, Martin?
Well, I would say the way they draw it, yes, NATO. From their perspective, NATO's not at war with Russia or the United States. It's Ukraine, which is just their proxy. But look, Putin knows, and this is against NATO. That's the criticism he's gotten inside Russia, that it was a special operation just to protect the Donbass. He didn't try to conquer all of Ukraine. And the hardliners there basically saying that's what he should have done. He should have gone in with shock and awe like we did into Iraq, and this war would have been over in a matter of a few weeks. Now you have China basically showing that if it's going to be NATO against Russia, China is coming in to back Russia. So will probably North Korea, and even Iran to some extent. I mean, this is a full-on historical war of East versus West. It's simple as that.
Where do you see the lid flying off the pot first? And pardon the flimsical euphemism here, but is it Iran? Because that seems to be heating up right now. I've been reading more and more reports just today about the situation in the region itself. Or is it really in Europe? Is it going to happen in Europe? Which I have a hard time still to believe. I'm in Germany, where our hospitals are preparing for war. They're running trials and everything that's in daily newspapers that regionally every hospital has been prepping for war and just running war scenarios. But what's your assessment? Where do you see the conflict potentially start?
Well, the real threat is in Europe. Iran, it's a Middle East issue, but there's something else behind the curtain, and that is Turkey. Erdogan has come out many, many times and saying he wants to resurrect the Ottoman Empire. So he was behind the fall of Lebanon. You're looking at a risk of even more of Syria. You're looking at a risk of fall of Lebanon, as well as even Jordan. And when Hamas went into Israel in that attack, he came out and was basically, pretending to be like the Caliph practically. And saying that all of the Arab nations should unite behind him against Israel. So you definitely have a Middle East problem here. U.S. could, will attack with its bunker bombs, etc., to the Iranian nuclear power facilities. But I think, Turkey has the largest army in the Middle East, and it's also at odds with Greece. When Greece got a few, of the new jets, they immediately came out and said, "Oh, now we could attack Turkey with a surprise attack." They're two NATO countries, so it's a mess in both places. But I would say, from a perspective of major international war, it's more with Europe.
Does that include, maybe I'm trying to understand it regionally, is it more of an attack on the Baltics, which we would include to Europe, meaning Lithuania, Latvia, and it's the third one, I'm drawing a blank on the third one, but is that more this region? Because Poland is massively ramping up. They're obviously expecting something to happen. Right?
Yes. Mostly what I heard, there will probably be, if there's any country that's going to start first, it will probably be in Poland. You have the former prime minister from Estonia. She's now up there in the EU. And she's the one that even came out and said Russia's too big and needs to be broken up. You're just dealing with hatred, absolute raw hatred that has existed for a long time. I mean, I've dealt around the world. I mean, even you take the Middle East. This is a religious war. I mean, there is no ultimate peace that can be, achieved that I can see. I mean, this is kind of like Ireland and the Protestants versus the Catholics. I mean, it's when you're dealing with these types of issues, it's not something that's negotiable, from what I can tell. I was called in by the Yugoslav government before it fell. And, and the thing that I was told there, oh, you know what they did to us? They killed like 600 of us and threw us in a common grave. And I thought I missed something on the news. I said, oh my God. I said, when was that? Oh, about 700 years ago. I said, oh, okay, that one, The same thing in Ukraine. I mean, look, we've had employees in Ukraine on both sides, in Kiev and Donetsk. We'll not even talk to each other. We had a conference in Greece, and the one from Kiev refused to fly back the fastest way because it was a stopover in Moscow. Just wouldn't do it. Spent twice the amount of time to try and get home. 3 connecting flights, etc. If you brought, honestly, a bottle of Russian vodka to dinner in Kiev, they'd smash it over your head. The hatred it's just systemic. There's no discussing this. I've tried, but this is what you're dealing with. Look at France versus England. All right. They put the train in underneath the channel. Where did the English bring it to? Waterloo Station. All right.
There's some symbolism in there. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when France joined the euro, they said nobody can issue a coin that celebrated Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo. But they also insulted Belgium. They said, oh, Belgium was a country created by the British to annoy the French. So Belgium issued a commemorative coin celebrating the defeat of Napoleon. I mean, these things just go on and on and on. I mean, we don't have it so much in the United States. And when they were forming the euro, I even said that to them. I said, you don't understand what made the United States great? I said it was discrimination. And they said, oh, how could you possibly say that? I said, because it was fair. Whoever was off the boat, the last didn't get a job until they spoke English. So I said, you talk to an American, you ask him what he is. Oh, I'm half German, I'm half Irish, whatever. You don't see that here in Europe. It's the language that keeps everybody separate. It's more than economics. The second generation over here, they all intermarried. It was no big deal. That's why, I had watched even a documentary on FDR. He went to Boston to try and justify going into World War II. And they're mostly Irish there, and they refused. They said, you really expect us to send our children over there to defend the British after what they did to Ireland? These types of resentments, they linger for a long time.
And talking about which, just trying to maybe segue, we need to talk Asia real quick as well, because Pete Hegseth is in Asia right now. He's in Manila in the Philippines, and he also made an interesting statement about Taiwan, which I didn't really expect to be as clear as it was, but they're supporting Taiwan moving forward. I personally expected it to be a bit of a trade-off here. Maybe we'll get Ukraine, you get Taiwan sort of situation, or we'll get peace in the Middle East, meaning Iran, but you get Taiwan sort of a bit of a trade-off. Like, what's your assessment there? Like, with Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, the US has a bit of a stronghold in Asia as well. That costs them a lot of money, coming back to what Trump has been trying to do in Europe. How does that fit into the overall narrative that we haven't really touched on and never really discussed on our channel either?
Honestly, everything was fine until the Biden administration. It was a silent agreement of one China, all right? And as long as you had that, then China didn't need to take Taiwan. You have to understand Asian culture. It is it's about saving face, and you can't slap China in the face and say no, you can't take Taiwan, blah blah blah. Now they have to. So they were perfectly fine before. And, look, the Biden administration was taken over by the neocons. And Blinken, look, that's what created the BRICS. Blinken was a complete idiot. He wanted to remove Russia from the SWIFT system. And then even threatened China. Well, if you help Russia, we'll do that to you. Oh, really? Okay. Voila. The BRICS is created. It was geopolitical. All right. You're not, they set up an alternative system, and the Biden administration basically destroyed the global economy. So this is what we're really facing. And back when Russia did go into Crimea, Obama tried that. He went to SWIFT to say remove them, and SWIFT refused to do so. You're not going to turn this into a weapon. So what did they do? They replaced the head of SWIFT in 2019. And he goes, oh, okay, fine. I could use the swimming pool in my backyard, and he just did whatever he was told. Asia is, unfortunately, I think you will see war there with Taiwan. You can't basically throw it in their face, because now they do have to respond. It's just the Asian culture. If they don't, then they appear weak. All right.
So that's what that was. Hegseth stating that is that really just throwing water in their face or slapping them with the white glove? Is that sort of what that was?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I don't. I disagree with that. I disagree with Trump rejecting Putin's offer. I know too much about.
Sorry, just Martin. Sorry to jump in, but what was Putin's offer? Because I was been reading the newspapers this morning, and all I heard was he rejected whatever was discussed, but it was never really discussed. Besides that, he wants sanction relief. Is that the only thing that he was asking for? Or was there more to it? Sorry, just to clarify.
The main thing was that Zelensky is a questionable leader. All right, his term expired last year. He's used martial law as a dictator to remain in power. So, and honestly, I've spoken to many Ukrainians, and there was an attempted assassination of him back, I think it was May 7th, and he replaced his bodyguard, and he no longer trusts Ukrainians. I mean, what I've heard from many of them is that if he was on fire, they wouldn't urinate on him until he was dead. You can look up when he was, even CNN had reported when he was elected, he ran on peace. All right. The death toll of the Civil War at that point was only 13,000. It's now 1.1 million. All right. And so what Putin has said is that he wanted him removed. The UN should put in a temporary government and control it. And then any peace deal would then be negotiated with the United Nations and ending it. All right. I think Trump was seriously wrong in rejecting that. I think it was a reasonable thing, because speaking to the Ukrainians that I know, whatever he does not necessarily represent the people. They see him basically as a puppet of the neocons and oligarchs. And by all accounts, he's now a billionaire himself on public, I mean, come on. I mean, he's been, kidnapping boys off the street. I put a video on our site of a kid with Down syndrome sent to the front line, and they're joking about him, and he wasn't even given a gun. Told it, well, get one from somebody that dies. I mean, look, his chief general quit. I mean, it's a guy, his actor or his liaison has fled the country, and he says that he wants to run for president if there's ever an election, and he promises to imprison Zelensky. I mean, our press is so indoctrinated by the neocons. When you read a thing, it says, "Oh, unprovoked. Russia invaded unprovoked." Really? I
think our press is more irritated that the climate change hasn't been added to the national security agenda these days. That's what I read in the press this morning. So,
they've already destroyed the economy. This is part of the problem of Europe. All right. The German economy has actually shrunk by 3%, maybe even up to 5% when we get all the numbers. Why? They put in this net zero nonsense. So a lot of small businesses lost. Then you put in these sanctions against Russia on energy. All right. So then the energy costs have exploded. All right. Europe is actually shrinking its economy. Small businesses been thrown out. This is part of the debt problem. I mean, whatever stupid decision could have came out of Brussels, they have done. And it's just total insanity. I mean, you had Merkel outlaw nuclear power because after Japan had that earthquake. Now they're finding out that, Wind power doesn't cut it. And you can run around with all the electric cars you want. That's it. I mean, I'm sorry. This is all nonsense. And when Germany was the cornerstone of the EU economy, it was the manufacturing base, and you've destroyed it.
They've done a great job at it too.
I mean, look at all the protests from closing Volkswagen plants because you've outlawed gas cars so nobody can buy them, so you don't make them anymore, and nobody wants to buy the electric ones. It's just whatever stupid decision they could have made, they have done. So
I think they've done a mighty fine job at it.
Look, this is why our computer shows that we're heading into this recession into 2028. This is not my personal opinion. We put in our computer's the only fully functioning AI system with a 50-year track record. I mean, and that's really what we're looking at. I mean, it's forecast every election correctly. Even Nigel Farage, he came to our 2019 conference in Rome, and he said, "Of course I'm here." He says he's the only one that said I would win. Every newspaper said he was going to lose. It's the same thing, with it projected Trump would win in 2016, even though Hillary raised twice as much money. Money doesn't buy it anymore. And the same thing, it showed that, Trump would win this time around, and it would be a clean sweep. And look, this is pretty simple, really. Herbert Hoover took office in early 29. All right, Great Depression comes. He didn't cause it, but he was blamed for it. They Hoovervilles and all this stuff, right? Whoever is in power, when you turn down the economy like that, they're thrown out. I don't care if they're left, right, center. It doesn't matter. It's economics that drives this. That's why a lot of people rely on our computer, because it's not calling up, people, who are you going to vote for? That's very nice, but they're easily manipulated. If you called everybody for your survey and they were only in Washington, D.C., I think Trump would have got maybe 5%, So ours is it just follows the economics. That's it.
Can I ask you, Martin, maybe as a last question to our conversation here, but we need to talk about gold, of course. So what is gold now with the explosive move that we've seen really forecasting? What's it telling us? What's your computer, what's Socrates telling you about gold, and why is gold behaving that way?
Look, when gold peaked in 1980, it went down for 19 years. National debt went up, inflation went up, etc. That does not move gold. If you look at gold, it rose from $100 in 76 to $400 by 79, December 79. Went from 400 to 875 in the last 6 weeks. Why? That's when Russia invaded Afghanistan. It's geopolitical. All right. The whole BRICS thing. All right. They're not buying gold, these central banks, and we advise a lot of them. They don't care if it goes up or down. That's not the issue. The issue is you go into war. What happens? They're going to default on the debt. China owns 10% of the U.S. national debt. All right. You really think that, and U.S. is threatening war with China all the time? They're not going to pay that debt. So they've been dumping it. All right. They've been buying gold. Why gold? Because it's neutral. They're not speculators. They're not like a retail, it's going to go up $10 this week. That's not the issue. They don't care if it's going down. All right. they're just basically getting out of debt, not just the dollar, but also Europe. Japan just sold, over 50 billion worth of euro debt. You can beat the drums all you want. I'm not going to buy your debt because you're not going to pay it. So gold has been rising as a geopolitical threat rises. That's the whole real backdrop to gold. And, inflation, the average person doesn't sit there and look at the CPI number, every month. It's, I remember my mother, watching the TV back in the 80s. And they said, oh, inflation's down. And well, how come it cost me more this month than it did last month? That's the way they look at it.
Yeah. Well, the average American, or 62% in the US, can only absorb a $2,000 shock. So nobody can buy an ounce of gold if it's at 3,000, if that makes sense. Right?
Yeah. I mean, look,
so,
it's,
to your point.
This is what you're really looking at. Take silver, for example. Why is it? And people, it's being manipulated. No, if you buy silver in London, there's a 20% VAT tax on top. Here I'm in Florida, a lot of southern states, there's no sales tax on gold or silver. In Europe, there's generally at least a VAT tax on the silver. Taxes, and we're not talking about a 1 or 2% stuff here. You're talking about 20%.
19 in Germany, yes.
Yeah, it's these things are important, to understand, and so gold has more of a lift from it internationally, mainly also because of taxation, etc. But this is the world we live in right now. They do know, they're not stupid, that they know people are using gold. My concern about Europe will be that you're looking at capital controls. After, just look at the charts of the stock markets from World War I. They immediately shut everything down. U.S. did shut down the New York Stock Exchange in 1914. Then they reopened it, but they shut them down because they were afraid people were going to sell the stocks, take the money, and leave. All right. Most people don't realize, but in 1914, the world was much more connected than we are today. The same stocks, bonds, etc., traded on the St. Petersburg Exchange in Russia, in Germany, in London, in Paris, as in New York. So there was a lot of arbitrage because it was the same instrument. You could buy or sell against one currency versus the other. And that's why I recommend just read Herbert Hoover's 1931. And he says that capital acted like a loose cannon on the deck of a ship in the middle of like a hurricane. He says it was shooting off in every which direction so fast we couldn't form a committee quick enough to figure out why. As one country would basically default, gold and everything would be fleeing to another one. That's what you're seeing now. Why are gold reserves being moved from Europe to America? It's the same thing. All right. U.S., as I've said, was bankrupt in 1896. The Treasury, J.P. Morgan had to lend $100 million in gold to bail it out. By the end of World War I, we were the financial capital of the world. By the end of World War II, the U.S. ended up with 76% of the entire official gold reserves because it all came here. We get tanks running down the streets, blowing up. You're not going to leave your money in the bank there. All right, you move it.
And that's what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not
This
tariff
is what's
fears.
the more they beat the war drums, and this is why the EU is also talking about pushing through the digital currency. Cancel all the paper currency. You then can't have bank runs. You eliminate that. They get some total control. They can now control not only what you can buy, but can you even get it out of the country? So their push to this digital currency is part of the capital control. So I strongly advise watch that. If you want to get money out, you better do it beforehand.
Okay. Martin, we got to wrap this up here. We're running a bit long, but it's super educational, super insightful. Maybe it's just one piece of advice you have for our audience for the next maybe 6 to 12 months, market related to a degree. Like, what would you suggest?
Well, you're going to get a bit of a pullback after March and April, just for like a couple months. But then we're probably going to see things percolating back up again after, I would say from May on. You also have elections there in Poland in May. I think they're the 18th. So all these things are going to be really coming together and creating more uncertainty for the future. And that's volatility. So we're showing, capital flows quite expanding aggressively into 2028. You definitely see a decline in domestic investments in Europe. People will not be buying the real estate or starting companies and things like that when you're talking about war. It's best to get out.
Fantastic. Martin, what a wonderful conversation. I really, really appreciate your time for joining us here on Soar Financially. Where can we send our audience? Where can they find more of your work, Martin?
It's at armstrongeconomics.com. We don't sell any.
To ask that question, by the way. So
we don't sell any advertising. You don't have to put in your email to read anything. We try to keep it as an open source for the entire world. We're actually not blocked anywhere. We have people in China and Russia can see it. So that's our main objective, that it's open to the entire world.
Fantastic. Martin, super insightful. Thank you so much for making the time and joining us here. We'll have to get you back maybe in 6 months to see how the world has changed, hopefully for the better, Martin. Let's see where we're headed. I don't have my hopes up, by the way. So
I know.
I know it's kind of grim out there. It's like open the newspaper every morning is a sad thing. At least the coffee is good these days. So
well. It's all I can say is this is the worst crop of world leaders I've ever seen in my entire life, and they're just desperate. And I don't know, the first thing a world leader should do is to try and protect his people and avoid war, and they're doing exactly the opposite.
Exactly. And let's hope they don't succeed, Martin. Let's hope, because in Europe, it's a hotbed. I don't like it at all. So, yes. Martin, we got to finish here. Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us, and everybody else. Thank you so much for joining us here on Soar Financially. Hope you enjoyed this conversation with Martin Armstrong. If you did, please leave a comment, leave a like, and of course, 80% of you are not subscribed to the channel. It's a free way to support us. Just hit that subscribe button. Helps us out tremendously, and we appreciate it. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back with lots more here on Soar Financially. Thank you.